For attending. Last night, the president made a very emotional plea for us to vote on new gun legislation that I think, quite frankly, will have a marginal effect, some of it dubious at best, and he really did make an emotional plea, and I just want to respond to the president by saying, Mr. President, you have a chance to enforce existing law in a way that would make us all safer. And I will go through two opportunities for us to work together in a bipartisan manner, but we don't need a cheerleader right now for new gun laws. We need somebody to enforce the laws we have, and there's no better position to be in than to be President of the United States or to be the Attorney General of the United States when it comes to enforcing existing federal gun laws. So I do wish the cheerleading would stop and the prosecutions begin. Now let me tell you about the way the law works in America. And if you're not surprised by this, I'll be surprised. This is a case in South Carolina, in my backyard. Alice Boland gets a gun. And she was coming through the Canadian Customs system into the United States on May 14, 2005, and she was stopped and asked some questions. She threatened to kill the police officer that was asking the questions, and she said, "President George W. Bush, give me a gun, I'm going to kill you." She reportedly told airport police, "I'm going to kill President Bush with a gun. Just give me a gun and I'm going to come back and shoot you all. I'm going to find a gun and kill you all." May 14, 2005. May 26, 2005. A Secret Service agent goes to interview her at her parents' home in Beaufort, South Carolina. And according to the affidavit, here's what she told the Secret Service agent. "Hell yes, I would shoot Bush," she says, according to the affidavit. "I would shoot him and the entire U.S. Congress. If I had a gun, I would shoot you too. I'll go to Washington and I'll shoot him dead, and if you get in my way, I'll shoot you too. I'll go wherever he is and find him and kill him. I'll kill Senator Robert Burr and Senator Hillary Clinton and all those people and think nothing of it." May 31st. A federal district court judge in South Carolina signs an order for psychiatric evaluation directing an examination of Boland's competency and insanity. June 14th, she is charged with threatening the President of the United States, indicted for threats against the President. A federal judge on July the 6th, 2005 in South Carolina signs an order stating medical personnel may involuntarily administer injectable, long-acting antipsychotic drugs to Boland in order to render her competent to stand trial. The court receives a report from the psychiatric evaluation and finds that she suffers from severe chronic mental illness, specifically schizophrenia, and that her prognosis remains poor. It further finds that Boland was legally insane at the time of the offense, a substantial risk to others, and requires care and treatment in a suitable psychiatric facility. In December the 2nd, 2005, she pleads not guilty by reason of insanity, and the case is dismissed without prejudice. As part of the plea agreement, the judge orders Boland to be admitted to a behavioral health center. She is also ordered to have therapeutic mental evaluation and required commitment proceedings instituted against her for long-term care. This is in 2005. She enters a plea not guilty by reason of insanity and is ordered by a federal judge to go into psychiatric treatment. Fast forward to February the 1st, 2013, just a few weeks ago. Miss Boland purchases a Taurus PT 22 semi-automatic pistol from a gun store in Walterboro, South Carolina. On February the 4th, she travels to Ashley Hall, a private school in Charleston, South Carolina, where she takes her loaded pistol and aims it at staff members. She repeatedly pulls the trigger. The gun did not have a chambered round and did not fire. She is charged with attempted murder. And I can fill in the gaps between 2005 and 2013 This very disturbed young lady was in a lot of different trouble, threatening a lot of different people. I feel for her family. She is obviously someone who is deeply, deeply mentally troubled. Upon the search of her vehicle that same day, they find a copy of a completed federal questionnaire required before legally purchasing a gun. They go to the gun store where she bought the weapon, and according to the regional director for the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive ATF, they say there was nothing illegal about the transaction. The arms dealer properly followed procedures. She, Boland, answered the questions properly. Long story short, someone who pled not guilty by reason of insanity of trying to kill the President of the United States in 2005 passed a background check to buy a weapon legally in South Carolina. To me, this is Exhibit A of a broken system. How can it be that the background check would allow her to buy a gun? How can it be that someone in the United States who pleads not guilty by reason of insanity in federal court is sent to a psychiatric evaluation by a federal judge, been found to be a danger to herself and others, is able to pass a background check, buy a gun, and thank God the gun didn't go off. So, ladies and gentlemen, my belief is that Republicans and Democrats have an opportunity here to fix the current system, and I will be introducing legislation to make sure that people like her, and I don't know how many they are, quite frankly, that when they go through the background check process, the system will indicate their prior exposure to court and their true mental status. This, to me, is an outrage, and it could have resulted in a tragedy. And if we had better laws on the books, she should have been found out when she tried to buy a gun. So my advice to Congress is, instead of expanding the background check program right now, let's focus on finding a way to make sure that a person who goes before a federal judge and pleads not guilty by reason of insanity and found to be insane, threatening to kill the President of the United States, at least can fail a background check. Second point I'd like to make was yesterday we had a hearing about the number of people who are denied, who fail a background check. Some of them are false positives, but very few. 80,000 people in 2012 failed a background check. Of those 80,000, 44 were prosecuted. I'm not very good at math, but that's 0.55, 55 100,000ths of 1%. I would argue that with this level of prosecution, the current law is not much of a deterrent. And if you expanded the current law and you had more people that fail a background check and do not get prosecuted, you're not addressing the problem. So to the Attorney General and the President of the United States, see if we can do better than 55 100,000ths of 1% in prosecutions before we expand the program. To my colleagues in Congress, if you want to pass something that really would matter, let's find a way to make sure that Alice Boland never gets a gun. I think most of us agree that one bullet in the hands of Miss Boland is one too many, and I think there are some circumstances where lawful citizens defending themselves against violent crime deserve to own a gun, and maybe 6 bullets in the case of the Atlanta home invasion may not be enough. So I intend to introduce legislation to fix the system so that Alice Bolands of the future do not pass a background check. And I am urging the administration to send over to me whatever resources they need to improve prosecutions so that we can create a deterrent. It's more than prosecuting people, it's more than background checks. I know it's a complicated endeavor, but this seems to be a good place to start. I've been a prosecutor in my past life, And the best thing you can do to make the community safe is create a sense that if you violate the law, something is going to happen to you that makes you think twice. I would argue, ladies and gentlemen, that in America, the idea of failing a background check, making a straw purchase of a gun, the consequences are almost negligible, and there is no sense of deterrent, and this is a place to start. Mr. President, no more speeches about expanding gun laws. Start enforcing the ones we have. Thank you.
Senator, looking at that chart, leaving aside the fact that the prosecutions aren't, there's still 80,000 people that were unable to get guns. So isn't that a sign that the system is actually working, and doesn't that argue in favor of expanding it?
Well, I would say that I'm not so sure those 80,000 people didn't get a gun. I'm saying they failed a background check. My point is that if you've got a law in the books to make it so that people who are not eligible for a gun won't apply, that they may have been turned down at one store, did they go somewhere else and purchase a gun? When word gets out that if you're a convicted felon and you try to buy a gun through the normal course of business and you're going to be subject to a federal prosecution, I think it will do more to deter felons from acquiring guns than some of the new proposals. So I don't know how many of the 80,000 wound up with a gun, but I do know this. A law on the books where 44 people out of 80,000 gets prosecuted is not much of a law.
Secretary, what about the President's statement last night that the victims of gun violence and their families deserve a vote? What do you have to say to that? Will you personally block a vote in the Senate
let's
on
vote.
gun control measures?
No, let's vote. I don't disagree with the President to have a debate. Let's vote. Let's find something we can agree on. Alice Boland should not get a gun. So part of the mix should be legislation to fix this problem. Let's try to find a way where Republicans, Democrats can resource or change the laws so that somebody actually gets prosecuted. And the young lady that lost her life a few weeks ago, I think it's Miss Pendleton from Chicago, heartbreaking story. Apparently one of the perpetrators was a 17-year-old young man who was convicted of was charged with a previous gun crime and got probation. I would argue that the laws that we have regarding misusing a gun or trying to buy a gun illegally are not sufficiently enforced to create a deterrent.
Senator, I'm having a hard time sort of figuring out what's different in what you're saying and what Democrats are saying. Democrats are saying people under the current system who shouldn't be able to buy guns are buying guns and the background check law should be changed. You're saying a person who shouldn't have been able to buy a gun bought a gun and the background system should be changed. What's the difference between
I think the difference is that my Democratic colleagues want to expand the background check law to make us all feel that we're safer. My retort to my Democratic friends is that you can't really feel safe by expanding a broken law. The question is the current system broken? I think that's the first thing we should address. Expanding a broken system where more people fail a background check but don't get prosecuted is not much of a deterrent. And clearly, the current system, before it gets expanded, needs to be reformed. Alice Boland getting a gun is a failure of the current system. So they're trying to create an impression if we just had more background checks, we would be safer. My argument is if you have more background checks that include more people, and nobody ever suffers the consequences of failing the background check, you're creating a false sense of security.
When she applied for the gun, the application doesn't ask, have you ever pled guilty for trying to...
Apparently not. That's I'm learning a lot from this case. Apparently being found not guilty by reason of insanity is not a disqualifier.
So that's not even on the application?
Well, they've got a block about being convicted. And apparently, according to the ATF, she passed the background check with a fact pattern of having been hauled before a federal court, threatening the President of the United States, being found not guilty because she was insane, and that doesn't go into the system as a disqualifier. I'm just as shocked as you are.
In her case, the background check didn't work. If she had gone to a gun show, there would have been no background check at all.
Right.
We think it's so important that background checks work, then shouldn't they apply to everyone who's trying to buy a gun?
Well, my belief is universal background checks are going to require universal registration of weapons. And my belief is that that's the wrong road to take, that I think most...
Isn't that against the law?
What's that?
To have a registry, isn't that against, you can't...
I just think that if you're going to have a universal background system for it to be as effective as you'd want, the next logical step is registering weapons, to have a database to work off of, and I think that's the wrong solution. I think the NRA and people like myself are not too much off base by telling the president before you make any more emotional speeches about how we're the problem. You, Mr. President, deserve some of the blame, not all the blame, but if your administration has a chance to do something about prosecuting people who fail a background check, and obviously you're not doing anything. Now I found a case. I mean, you've been president for 4 years. If you're really this serious about the topic, you know, and I blame myself, I should have known this. I think every member of Congress deserves some blame for not understanding that you could be found not guilty by reason of insanity for threatening to kill the President of the United States, and you could still pass a background check. I'm not blameless here either. But what I'm saying is that we talk a lot about new laws, we talk about the emotional aspects of gun violence. We don't seem to be doing very much in the real world to make it to deter people.
So Senator, she should not be able to buy a gun at a store.
Mm-hmm.
What you're saying, she should have failed a background check at
Right.
a store, but she should be able to buy a gun at a gun show.
No, she shouldn't be able to buy a gun anywhere.
Senator Graham, on a different topic that
Mhm.
you're not involved in, Chuck Hagel. When this vote comes to stop the debate, are you going to be a yes or a no?
Oh, I'm going to be a no. I think right now they're trying to, okay, they're jamming us, number one. I remember very well the Democratic Congress investigating the Bush administration deeply and widely for failures of their interrogation program. I remember being involved with Carl Levin to spend thousands of man-hours to find out how the interrogation programs got so off track. There seems to not be much interest to hold this president accountable for a national security breakdown that led to the first ambassador being killed in the line of duty in over 30 years. We reported Chuck Hagel out Tuesday. There's some information that we still don't have that I think is relevant. And no, the debate on Chuck Hagel is not over. It has not been serious. We don't have the information we need. And I am going to fight the idea of jamming somebody through until we get answers about what the president did personally when it came to the Benghazi debacle. I think Democrats had no problem doing that with Bush, and quite frankly, they did the country a service by probing into failures. I'm going to do the same.
Senator, how do you respond to critics who are saying that you're just moving the goalposts? First, it's about Hagel's past, and it's about what he said.
Oh, I'm going to take every opportunity. I'm not denying it. I'm going to.
You are moving the goalposts.
No, I'm going to hit you and keep hitting you. Absolutely. You're not going to get away with not answering basic questions. Did you make a phone call on September the 11th to any Libyan government official using the weight and the voice of the President of the United States to help these people in their time of great need? When the rescue team was held up at the airport in Benghazi for 3.5 hours, did you ever pick up the phone to try to get some help? Secretary Clinton says she was yelling at Libyan government officials to help us. I want to know, did our president, did our commander-in-chief do anything personally? You better believe I'm not going to let this go. Now back to gun control.
This is actually on Hagel and everything else.
Okay.
Well, does it seem, though, if Reid has not filed cloture yet, okay, just from the time, if he does it today, that gets us to Friday. Well, that either means a weekend session or next week, or the nomination sits out there for a week. Some might say, well, this gives you an opportunity to sort of string this out more and say, you know, develop more of a case against Hagel. Is that part of the strategy here too? And the second part of the question is the fact that this would fall into this rare category of only Kempthorne and Verity as candidate nominees that required 60 votes.
If Chuck Hagel's nomination is not controversial, I don't know what is. Now, we reported John Kerry out in one day, and he got 97 votes. I don't think I'm being unfair to the process by saying, slow down, I want to find more about Hagel If there are 2 speeches that he gave that weren't on his disclosure form, I want to see and hear about those speeches, if they exist. And we reported him out Tuesday, and we're going to vote 2 days later on a nomination this controversial? And am I supposed to sit on the sidelines and be a good, compliant Republican and just let this administration not account for what I think is a national security breakdown of monumental proportions, never tell us who changed the talking points because it's the Obama administration? I remember very well what the Congress did when it came to Bush administration failures. We provided oversight. And if the shoe were on the other foot, and this was a Republican president, I guarantee you there'd be a lot of Democrats doing more than I'm doing. And you know what? They probably should. And I can tell anybody in this room, when it came time to explore failures of leadership on the Bush administration, when it came to torture or the idea that Iraq was a few dead enders, John McCain and Lindsey Graham joined in a bipartisan fashion because it was the right thing to do. I am calling on my Democratic colleagues. Let's find out what happened in Benghazi. Don't paper it over. Don't let them stonewall, mislead, deny, and deceive. Hold them accountable. And for God's sakes, let's be able to tell the families what happened to their loved ones that night. Now back on to guns.
For you here. Yes, Alice Boland did get a gun, but can you talk about where the system, in your words, can you talk about where the system went wrong and who was to blame? And then also, can you talk about
Good question, actually.
where legislation that's in your bill that's going to make everything different?
I think the system went wrong when we designed it so that Alice Boland could get a gun. That means every public official in Washington, D.C. has some blame. You know, it's easy for me to blame the president. Well, I should have known. I think all of us should have been. We talk a lot about the emotional aspects of gun control. It's a political issue, but there's a substantive problem. Slow down for a minute, and I will introduce legislation to make sure that Alice Boland doesn't get a gun. Why? Because she's a very sick young lady. And you want to talk about gun shows? We're talking about private sales at a gun show. I think Senator Coburn is trying to work on a solution to that problem. But there's got to be balance. If I buy a gun from a friend, I don't think we need a background check there. There is no perfect system. There has to be some balance here. I'm trying to show you 2 cases where the law that exists today, one is broken to the point we should all be embarrassed, and thank God the gun jammed. I'm also talking about a current system that is a joke. It is a joke.
Regarding that, are you saying that everybody who applies for a gun and is denied through a background check should be prosecuted?
I'm saying that 44 out of 80,000 doesn't. I don't know. See, I'm not.
There are 9 categories of people who get denied guns under the background check law. Let's say I apply and I'm turned down because is that a crime to apply and honestly state I'm in this category of people?
I would assume that in the 80,000s there's some false positives. 2, there's some people that made innocent mistakes. But in the case of, I can give you some examples, I should have brought them with me, that if you fail the background check, you got straw man purchases. That here's what I would suggest. Out of the 80,000, more than 44 probably did it illegally. You'll never convince me that the law is serving the public well when it's a crime, to apply for a gun when you're not allowed to. And out of the population of 80,000 to pick and choose as or somebody to prosecute, you only pick 44.
Senator Graham, when it comes to the gun registry, how can there be a registry when background data is deleted 24 hours after a purchase, and the ATF isn't allowed to consolidate by law?
Some of the new laws require people who own an AR-15 to register their gun. There's a component to that in the assault weapons ban that they're proposing. Clearly, to me, that's where we're headed.
Senator,
one last question.
Alice Boland and the legislation you want to introduce, would it be limited to people like her who have been found innocent by reason of insanity? And if it's broader than that, how will you avoid it becoming a database of people with mental illness who overwhelmingly are no more violent than anyone else?
And therein is the trick, isn't it? How do we deny people who are mentally unstable the ability to buy a gun that would protect us all? And at what point in time do people who have personal problems are denied their Second Amendment rights? I think clearly, if you find yourself before a federal judge and you plead not guilty by reason of insanity and the court agrees you're crazy and are insane trying to kill the President of the United States, that's the case where everybody would say we need to fix the system. Now, how many people have been found by competent legal bodies to be a danger to themselves and others that are not in a state or federal system? I don't know the answer to that, but I need to know. And so this case of Alice Bolden is an opportunity for me and other members of Congress to dig into this and fix the current system.
Just to follow up, then why not at the very least that people who are found innocent by, or not guilty by reason of insanity in the federal system, if that person is an inherent danger and should not have a level 22, why not at the very least extend that to a federal law governing state
databases? Yeah,
well, or just somebody who's found by a state judge to be not guilty of a violent crime.
That's actually how you connect two systems. That's actually a good point. I'd like to find out how could you make sure that the federal court verdict is captured by the system, and what could you do with a state court verdict that would be captured by the system?
Senator, my understanding is that the Gun Control Act of 1968 already prohibits people who were found not guilty by criminal insanity from owning a gun. So was this simply a case of the records not being in the system, and are you?
I really don't know, other than to tell you that the Mr. Woodham said there was nothing illegal about the transaction. The arms dealer properly followed procedures. She answered the questions properly. I'm just astonished. I don't know what to tell you. I'm trying to find out, is he wrong? Was this already covered by the law and just didn't make it in the system? But how could this not make it in the system? So it's one of two things. The system is completely broken because it can't enter someone like this, or there's a loophole in the system that she falls through. One more question, I gotta go.
This is, I think, is obviously an exceptional case, but the overwhelming majority of criminals get their guns, they steal their guns. Off the street. They're not going to stores. I think it's 40% of those in jail got them from gun shows. So all the background checks can work aren't going to really do much to you.
Well, here's what I think. I think background checks, as the point you made, 80,000 people popped up as not being eligible for a gun for various reasons. I don't want to stop background checks. I'd like to make them more efficient. But the idea of a criminal getting a gun through violence or theft is a reality. The young man in Connecticut took his mother's weapon and shot his own mother 4 times. Why didn't we know about his mental illness? And it goes back to his question. There was probably no court that adjudicated him. So here's what I would say. If you use a gun violently, illegally, that you ought to be prosecuted and taken off the streets as long as possible. And to the 17-year-old who was part of killing the 15-year-old Miss Pendleton, he had already been involved in a gun-related incident and got probation. So here's where I would like to end this. For God's sakes, let's all agree that we can do a better job of enforcing existing law. The next time a 17-year-old has been charged with a gun crime, who's got gang ties, don't give him probation. See if you can get prosecutions up to a level of maybe 1% where there will be a real deterrent. And for God's sakes, let's make sure that Alice Bolden never gets a gun. And the common theme here is you're taking existing law and better enforcing it, and you're making a common sense change. We're going to have a flood of gun legislation that's going nowhere. We're going to vote, and people like me are going to go back to South Carolina and say, I stood up for your Second Amendment rights. And my friends on the other side are going to go back to their districts and said, I tried to do something about rampant gun violence. And we're all going to be talking to our bases. And at the end of the day, this problem doesn't get any more solved if all we do is talk. There's an opportunity here this time to address some areas in this emotional, real problem, abuse of guns by people who shouldn't have them, in a way to make a difference. And I will say this, being from South Carolina, I've owned guns all of my life. I own an AR-15. I saw the movie Django. I like Quentin Tarantino. That may say a lot about my movie taste. But there are many moving parts to this. Violence in the media, video games. But I would just say this. Me owning an AR-15 is not a threat to anyone because I'm not going to abuse the right to own that gun. I just don't know how much we at the federal level can do to create a solution to a very complicated problem where it is part of our constitutional right to own a gun. Let's start with the proposition that a mentally unstable person should not get one bullet, but someone who's done nothing wrong, who's been a law-abiding citizen, should have a right to own and bear guns commonly held in the United States. Thank you.